You picked a stranger over me, Corbin. Go ahead. Say it out loud so I can hear how ridiculous it sounds. Dalton's voice came through my phone so loudly that the woman 2 seats down flinched and pulled her son closer to her chest. I did what I always did when he got like this, which was fold myself inward and try to become smaller than the chair holding me. Gate B47 at Denver International Airport was packed with delayed passengers, and every single one of them was now listening to my fiancé take me apart over a flight I had missed by 11 minutes. She isn't a stranger, she's my neighbor, I said quietly, cupping my hand around the phone like that would help. Mrs. Ferraro collapsed in the hallway, Dalton. She's 78 and she lives alone and there was nobody else there. I waited for the ambulance, that's all I did. I heard him exhale through his teeth, that sharp little sound he made when he had already decided I was wrong and was only deciding how much to punish me for it. My hands were shaking. I pressed my free palm flat against my knee to stop it, and it did not stop. So you sat on a floor holding some old woman's hand while my sister's rehearsal dinner fell apart, he said. Do you understand what today was? Do you understand that my mother has been planning this weekend for 9 months and the one thing she asked was that both of us walk in together? His voice climbed with every sentence the way it always did, building itself a staircase. You had one job, get on a plane, and you couldn't even manage that. Something in my throat closed up. I wanted to tell him that Mrs. Ferraro had gripped my fingers so hard on that hallway floor that the marks were still on my hand, and that she kept apologizing for being a bother while I kept telling her she wasn't. But I already knew none of that would land. In 4 years I had learned exactly which parts of me were worth explaining to him and which parts he would simply talk over. I'm on the next flight out, I said. 3 more hours, I'll be there before midnight. I'll be there for the ceremony, I promise. And he laughed, and it was not a warm sound. Your promises, he said. Corbin, your promises are decorative. They look nice and they hold nothing. I opened my mouth and nothing came out, and then the line went dead in my ear, and the silence afterward was somehow louder than the shouting had been. I lowered the phone to my lap and stared at the black screen. My reflection stared back at me, and I did not like the man in it. Around me the terminal went on being a terminal, and I sat in the middle of it feeling like something that had been dropped and not picked back up. My eyes burned. I refused to cry in an airport in front of strangers. I had at least that much left. Then a voice came from my right, low and calm and unhurried. Can I say one thing, or would you rather I mind my own business? I'll do either. I just want to ask first. I turned my head. The man beside me was around 30, with dark hair cut short at the sides, and eyes the color of storm glass, a gray-green that shifted with the light. He wore a plain olive Henley with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, and there was a hospital badge clipped to his backpack strap. You heard all of it, I said. It wasn't a question. Everyone in this concourse heard all of it, he answered, without a shred of pity in his voice, which was somehow the kindest thing about it. But that isn't what I noticed. He tilted his head slightly. You apologized 4 times. He never once asked whether you were okay, and you helped somebody today, and you told him about it like you were confessing to a crime. I felt that land somewhere under my ribs, in a place I had spent a long time keeping locked. He's under a lot of pressure, I said, and I heard how automatic it sounded, like a line I had rehearsed so many times that the meaning had worn off it. His sister's wedding is a big deal for his family. He isn't like this normally. The man beside me didn't argue. He just looked at me the way you look at someone you've decided not to lie to. Everybody's under pressure, he said. Most people don't dismantle another person in public over it. He glanced down, and I realized he was looking at my hands. They were still trembling, my fingers curled around the phone. Can I ask you something clinical? When did you last eat? I blinked. What? You've got a tremor, and you're pale, and you're breathing high in your chest, he said. I'm a trauma nurse. It's an occupational hazard. I read bodies before I read faces. Breakfast, I said. Maybe. There was coffee. He nodded once, unzipped the front pocket of his backpack, and held out a wrapped granola bar like it was the most ordinary transaction in the world. Then start here. Low blood sugar makes everything feel like the end of the world, and you're already having the end of the world today. I stared at the thing in his palm, this small, stupid gesture, and for reasons I could not explain, my eyes finally spilled over. I turned my face toward the window fast and wiped it with the back of my wrist and hated myself. He didn't comment on it. He just set the granola bar on the empty seat between us and looked out at the runway like nothing had happened, giving me the one thing nobody had given me in a very long time, which was room. When I finally trusted my voice again, I said thank you, and it came out cracked. Sawyer, he said, and offered his hand. Sawyer Vance. I took it. His grip was warm and steady, and there was a faded scar across two of his knuckles. Corbin Hale. I let go a second later than I meant to. You're on the Savannah flight too? He held up his boarding pass between two fingers. Same one. Which, judging by that board, is not going anywhere for a while. And as if the airport had been waiting for its cue, the overhead speakers crackled and a woman's voice announced that due to a storm system over the southeast, Flight 147 to Savannah was being delayed an additional 4 hours, and that the gate agents appreciated our patience. A groan went up across the whole concourse. I looked down at my dead phone screen, at 4 unanswered hours stretched out in front of me like a road I hadn't asked to walk, and then at the granola bar sitting on the seat beside me. 4 hours, Sawyer said. And there was something almost gentle in the way he said it, like he was setting down something fragile. That's a long time to sit alone with a conversation like the one you just had. He stood and slung his backpack over one shoulder. There's a quiet corner by the sea bridge, better light, fewer people, and coffee that isn't actively hostile to human beings. You can come or you can stay, no pressure either way. And then, for the first time all day, I chose something for myself. I picked up the granola bar, picked up my bag, and stood up. The corner Sawyer found was better than he'd promised. The sea bridge had a long wall of glass looking out over the runways, and the late afternoon light came through it in wide gold bars that fell across the empty seats. There were maybe 6 other people scattered along the whole stretch. He bought 2 coffees without asking what I wanted and set one down in front of me, black, with 3 sugar packets balanced on the lid. I didn't know how you take it, he said, sitting down across from me, so I brought options. You looked like a man who needs the sugar more than the opinion. I laughed aloud. It surprised both of us. It came out rusty, like a door in a house nobody had opened in a while, and Sawyer's mouth curved slightly at the sound. There it is, he said. That's the first time your shoulders have come down from your ears since I sat next to you. I tore open all 3 sugar packets and emptied them in, mostly to have something to do with my hands so they would stop announcing to the room exactly how the last hour had gone. I'm not usually like this, I said. I'm not a crying in an airport person. I have a job. I'm functional. I want that on the record. Noted, he said seriously. What's the job? And that was when I hesitated, because the truthful answer had become complicated. I teach cello, I said finally. Private students, mostly kids, some adults who always wanted to learn and finally decided they were allowed to. I turned my cup in a slow circle on the table. 19 students right now. 2 of them are auditioning for the Youth Symphony in the spring, and one of them, Priya, she's 11. She's better than I was at 11. She's better than I was at 20. That's the first time you've sounded proud of anything all day, Sawyer said. Why does your face do that thing when you say it? I didn't know what to say to that, so I told him the truth, which was becoming an alarming habit around this man, because Dalton calls it babysitting with sheet music. The words sat there between us on the table. Saying them out loud made them uglier than they had been in my head, where I had been storing them politely for 2 years. He's not entirely wrong about the money, I added quickly. It isn't a lot. He does very well. He develops commercial property. He carries most of what we have. Sawyer set his coffee down. Can I point something out? He asked. You just defended him inside your own sentence. You didn't even finish the criticism before you started apologizing for making it. I opened my mouth to argue and found nothing there. Out on the runway, a plane climbed into the gray, and I watched it until it was a speck, and then I said quietly, I used to play professionally. I was second chair in a regional orchestra for 2 seasons. What happened? He got a project in Denver, I said. Big one. It made his career. And the orchestra was 3 states away, and we did long distance for 4 months, and he hated it. And one night he asked me whether a chair in a mid-size orchestra was really worth what it was costing us. I could still see the kitchen where he'd said it, the specific shade of the light. So I gave notice, and I moved, and I started teaching, and I told myself it was temporary. I looked up. That was 5 years ago. I haven't played in front of an audience since. Sawyer was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost the easy edge. Do you still play alone? Sometimes, at night, with the practice mute on so the neighbors don't hear. And then, hearing myself, I put my face in my hands and laughed again, and this time it wasn't funny at all. God. I mute myself so nobody has to deal with the sound of me. Yeah, he said softly, I noticed that too. We sat with it. Then he did something I didn't expect, which was to give me something back. I was engaged, he said. 4 years ended 2 years ago. He was a surgical resident, brilliant, everyone loved him. He rubbed his thumb along the scar on his knuckles, and he had this way of making every single thing I felt into a symptom. If I was upset, I was tired. If I was angry, I was being dramatic. If I was hurt, I was too sensitive for the job I'd chosen. After a while, I stopped bringing him anything at all, because everything I brought came back diagnosed. How did it end? I asked. I came home from a 19-hour shift, Sawyer said. We'd lost a 14-year-old that night. First one I couldn't shake. I sat down on the edge of the bed and I said, I need you to just hold me for a minute. And he said in a minute he had charts. And I sat there and I waited. He looked up at me and his storm glass eyes were very steady. And I understood that I had been waiting for that minute for 4 years and it was never going to arrive because it wasn't a minute he was short on. Something in my chest cracked so cleanly I almost heard it. I don't know why I'm telling a stranger any of this, I said. You're not telling a stranger, he said. You're telling somebody who isn't going to use it against you later. That's a different thing, and I think it's been a while. I picked up my phone then, because I couldn't sit inside the accuracy of that sentence any longer, and the screen lit up with 4 messages from Dalton, and not one of them asked how I was. Where are you now? Answer me. My mother is asking and I'm making excuses for you again. Unbelievable. Don't bother replying, I'll handle it myself. I always do. I started typing an apology, deleted it, started an explanation about the delay, deleted that, started a third thing that was mostly the word please, and my thumb hovered over the send button. You've written and deleted 3 times, Sawyer said, not unkindly. I wasn't going to say anything, but I've watched you do it and I want you to notice you're doing it. I'm trying to get it right, I said. I know, he said. That's the part that's breaking my heart a little. You're not writing a message, you're diffusing something. I set the phone face down on the table, left the message unsent. It was such a small act of rebellion that it was almost pathetic, and it made my heart beat like I'd run somewhere. Sawyer didn't congratulate me, which I was grateful for. He just slid the second coffee toward me and said, drink that before it goes cold. And then he told me a completely unrelated story about a man who came into his ER with a fishing lure through his eyebrow and was more concerned about the fish. I laughed until my eyes watered, and for once it was a good reason, and somewhere in the middle of it I realized that 4 hours had turned into 40 minutes without my permission. And when the boarding announcement finally came, when the speaker called Flight 147 to Savannah and the whole concourse began gathering its bags, I felt something I had absolutely no right to feel about a man I'd known for one afternoon. I felt disappointed that it was over. I found my row and shoved my bag into the overhead bin, and when I turned to sit down, Sawyer was standing in the aisle behind me with his boarding pass held up between 2 fingers and an expression of complete innocence. 22B, he said. I want it on record that I did not do this. I looked at the pass, then at him. You absolutely did not do this, I agreed, because you'd have to have gotten to the gate before me and you did not. See, he said, sliding into the seat, that's the kind of alibi work I appreciate. The cabin filled around us with that particular chaos of a delayed flight, everyone tired and short-tempered and negotiating overhead space like a small war. I took the window. Out on the tarmac, the ground crew moved under floodlights, throwing bags in long arcs, and the sky above them had gone to that deep blue that comes just before real dark. Sawyer pulled a paperback out of his backpack, cracked it open, and read for exactly 2 minutes before he said, without looking up, "You're holding that armrest like it owes you money." "Take off," I admitted. "Not the flying, just the leaving the ground part. The part where it's decided," he said, still reading. "Yeah, most people who hate takeoff aren't scared of altitude. They're scared of the moment it stops being reversible." I turned to look at him and he turned a page, entirely casual, like he hadn't just described my entire adult life in 2 sentences. "Do you always do that?" I asked. "Do what?" "Say the thing." He finally looked over and the corner of his mouth moved. I hold people's hands while they're dying, Corbin. I lost my taste for small talk somewhere around year 3. We took off. I gripped the armrest and the engines screamed and the ground fell away, and then we were climbing through the last of the light and the wing outside my window went orange and then silver and then dark. When we leveled out and the seatbelt sign chimed off, I got out my phone and connected to the plane's Wi-Fi and told myself I was doing it to check on Mrs. Ferraro. That was even half true. Her son had texted to say she had a hairline fracture in her hip, that she was stable and comfortable and already complaining about the food, and that she kept asking whether somebody had remembered to feed her cat. I read it 3 or 4 times. It was the only message all day from a person who was glad I existed. And under that there were 9 new messages from Dalton. I read all of them. They started sharp and got worse, and the last one said, "My mother wants to know if you're even coming." I said, "I honestly don't know anymore. That's where we are." I sat very still with the phone in my hands, and I could feel Sawyer not looking at me, deliberately, which was its own kind of attention. "He's told his family I might not show up," I said. "To my own wedding. I mean not mine, his sister's." I laughed and it was an awful sound. You know what's insane? My first thought wasn't that it's cruel. My first thought was, how am I going to fix this when I land? Sawyer closed his book and set it on his knee. "Can I tell you how we do triage?" he asked. "Please," I said, "because I'm out of ideas." "When it's bad and there's too much of it, you stop asking what needs fixing first," he said. "You ask what's actually bleeding. Everything else can wait, and most of it isn't as urgent as it's screaming." "So what's bleeding?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "You are," he said. "You've been bleeding all day and you've spent every hour of it worrying about his dinner party." My throat closed. Down below, through a break in the clouds, a city went by in a scatter of orange lights, some entire town full of people going about their lives, and I watched it slide behind us. "I love him," I said, because it felt like something I was supposed to say, and because some part of me still believed it. "I believe you," Sawyer said, and there was no fight in it at all, which somehow made it harder. "That's not the part I'd question." "Then what would you question?" "Whether he's ever once let you be the person in the room who needs something." He said it gently. "Corbin, in 4 hours you've told me about your neighbor, your students, an 11-year-old Celeste, and his sister's wedding. You haven't told me one thing you want, not one. I've been counting because I wanted to be wrong." I sat there in seat 22A at 35,000 feet and I searched myself for an answer and I could not find one, and the not finding was the worst thing that had happened to me all day. Worse than the phone call, worse than the terminal, worse than all those staring faces. "I want to play again," I said so quietly it was almost nothing. "In front of people. I want to stop muting myself." Sawyer didn't cheer. He just nodded slowly, like I'd handed him something breakable and he was finding somewhere safe to set it down. "Okay," he said, "that's one, that's a start." Then he shifted in his seat and his hand came to rest on the armrest between us, near mine but not on it, deliberately leaving the last inch for me to close or not close. I didn't close it, but I didn't move away either, and we sat like that for a while, an inch apart, with the engines humming underneath us. "Can I ask you something?" I said eventually. "You've been kind to me for 6 hours and I don't understand what you're getting out of it." He was quiet long enough that I thought I'd offended him. 2 years ago I sat in a hospital parking garage at 3 in the morning after I ended things, he said, and I scrolled through my whole contact list and there was nobody in it I could call. Not because people didn't care. Because I'd spent 4 years making myself small enough to fit in someone's schedule, and small people don't keep many friends. He looked over. I promised myself that if I ever saw somebody in that parking garage, I'd stop the car. That's it. That's the whole thing. There's no angle, Corbin. I opened my mouth and closed it. Then the cabin lights came up, and the captain's voice announced our descent into Savannah, and the flight attendants started their pass through the aisle. I put my seat upright and turned my phone off without answering a single message. Below us the coast appeared. A black curve stitched with lights, and the plane banked toward it, and my stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with altitude. "He's going to be at the curb," I said. Sawyer looked at me steadily. "Probably. And I'm going to get in the car. Probably that too," he said. "I'm not going to pretend one afternoon undoes 4 years. That's not how it works, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something." The wheels touched down and the whole cabin lurched forward and the engines roared into reverse. Then what am I supposed to do? I asked him over the noise. He unbuckled his seatbelt and looked at me with those gray-green eyes. Pay attention, he said, that's all. Just stop looking away and watch what happens next. Savannah's baggage claim at 11 o'clock at night was a strange kind of purgatory, half empty and too bright, with the carousel groaning around and people standing in that slumped way people stand when they've been traveling too long. I pulled my suitcase off the belt and turned, and Sawyer was standing a few feet away with his backpack over one shoulder, and it was obvious from our faces that neither of us had figured out how to do this part. So, I said, this is the bit where we pretend we're going to keep in touch and then don't. That's the standard version, yeah, he said. He set his bag down. Before you go, I want to say one thing, and then I'm going to walk away and let you have your life. Okay, in 7 hours, he said, I've watched you at a gate, in a terminal, on a plane, and standing here. And you've smiled exactly twice, and both times it was because of a story about a fishing lure. He said it without drama, like a man reading a chart. I don't think the problem is that today was bad, Corbin. I think the problem is that you couldn't tell me when the last good one was. I asked, and you changed the subject. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to list vacations and birthdays and quiet Sundays, and I stood there in a baggage claim in Georgia with my mouth slightly open, and I could not produce a single one that didn't have a footnote attached. What am I supposed to do about that tonight? I said. Nothing, he said. Tonight you go to a wedding weekend. Nobody makes a real decision at 11 at night after a delayed flight. All I'm asking is that you don't unsee it. Then he crouched, unzipped the front of his backpack, and came up with a folded pharmacy receipt and a pen. He wrote on the back of it and handed it to me. There was a phone number, and under the number, drawn in 3 quick strokes, was a heartbeat line, the kind that runs across a monitor, one spike and then steady. Occupational hazard again, he said when he saw my face. What does it mean? I asked. It means it's still going, he said. That's all a rhythm strip ever means. It means whatever else happened today, you're still going. I folded the receipt in half and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket and flattened my palm over it through the fabric. Why the paper? I asked. Why not just put it in my phone? Sawyer picked up his backpack. Because a number in a phone is easy to delete when somebody's standing over your shoulder telling you to, he said. Paper you have to decide about. He said it lightly, but it went through me like cold water because he'd said it before it happened, and I didn't understand yet that it was a prediction. He held out his hand and I shook it, and this time neither of us let go quickly. Sawyer, I said, thank you, not for the coffee, for asking first. At the gate you asked if you could say something. Nobody's asked me anything in a long time. Something moved across his face that I couldn't name. Take care of yourself, Corbin Hale, he said, and then he walked out through the sliding doors into the wet Georgia night, and he didn't look back, which I somehow knew was on purpose, and the doors closed behind him and my phone buzzed in my hand. I'm at the curb. Black Range Rover. Hurry up, I've been circling for 20 minutes. Dalton didn't get out of the car. He unlocked the doors and I put my own suitcase in the back and got into the passenger seat, and he pulled into traffic before I had my seatbelt on. He was in a charcoal suit with the tie loosened, straight from the rehearsal dinner, and he smelled like someone else's cigar smoke. You look terrible, he said. There's a garment bag in the back for tomorrow. My mother picked it because you obviously weren't here to be measured. Dalton, about Mrs. Ferraro. Please don't, he said, holding up one hand off the wheel. I've spent all night explaining you to 40 people and I don't have anything left tonight. Let's just get through the weekend. So we drove. 25 minutes of silence with the wipers going, past the marsh grass and the low black water, and he took 2 calls on speaker and laughed on both of them. Charming and warm, the man I had fallen in love with, and then hung up and went silent again with me. He asked me exactly one question the whole drive. You didn't bring the cello, did you? I said no. He said, good. The house was his parents' place on the water outside the city, white and enormous, with 2 rows of hurricane lanterns burning down the front walk and cars filling the circular drive. Through the tall windows I could see the tail end of the rehearsal dinner still going, people holding glasses, his sister Nora in the middle of a laughing circle. Dalton parked and turned off the engine and sat there for a second with his hands still on the wheel. Okay, he said. You're tired, they're drunk, it'll be fine, just be easy tonight, please. And that word did something to me. Easy. Not warm, not honest. Easy, like a setting on a machine. I looked at his profile in the dark and I thought about a man in an olive Henley asking permission before he spoke, and I said, "Dalton, do you want to know if I'm okay?" He turned. He actually looked confused, which was the part that hurt. What? It's a simple question. I've been up since 5. I sat on a floor with an old woman who thought she was dying. I've been traveling for 15 hours. Do you want to know if I'm okay? He exhaled, long and tired, and it was the exhale of a man being asked for a favor at a bad time. "Corbin, my sister gets married in 19 hours, he said. "Can we do this after?" He got out of the car, and I sat alone in the passenger seat for 4 or 5 seconds with the tick of the cooling engine and the sound of laughter coming from the house, and I felt the folded receipt in my inside pocket press against my chest when I breathed in. Inside it was warmer than I expected and colder than it looked. Nora hugged me and said she was glad I made it and meant it. His mother Meredith held both my hands and said, "There he is," in a voice like sugar over glass. And then, we were beginning to think we'd have a gap in the photographs. His father shook my hand and asked what I did again, and when I told him, he said, right, the music thing," and turned to refill his glass before I finished the sentence. I made it 40 minutes. I answered the questions, I laughed at the right places, and when someone asked how Dalton and I met and he said he was playing at a fundraiser I was dragged to, and someone else said, "Oh, you play," and Dalton said he used to. Now he teaches, in the exact tone you'd use to say a thing had been demoted. I set my glass down on the nearest table and went out through the French doors into the garden because I had run out of face to make. The garden ran down toward the water in long terraces, all clipped hedges and white gravel, and the noise of the party thinned out behind me until it was just a warm hum. Down at the bottom there was a low stone wall, and past it the marsh and the Black River. I made myself breathe slower and lower, the way Sawyer had described, and after a minute my hands stopped shaking. The air smelled like salt and cut grass. I heard the gravel behind me before he spoke. "You walked out," Dalton said. 40 minutes and you walked out of my sister's rehearsal dinner." I didn't turn around. I needed air. "You needed air," he repeated. "My aunt asked where you'd gone. Do you know what I said? I said you were on a call. I lie for you constantly, Corbin. Do you ever notice that? I've built a whole second career out of explaining you to people." "Your father called it the music thing," I said, still looking at the water. "And you told the whole room I used to play, like it's a condition I recovered from." "You did used to play," he said. "That's a fact. What do you want me to do, lie in the other direction?" "I want you to not sound relieved about it." He laughed, short and disbelieving. "Unbelievable. This is what you want to do tonight. Not the flight, not the fact that you humiliated me in front of my entire family. You want to relitigate your orchestra." I turned around. He was standing on the path with his hands in his pockets, backlit by the house, his face half in shadow. "I gave that up for you," I said. "You didn't ask me to, exactly. You just made it expensive enough that I stopped. I never told you to quit." "You asked if it was worth what it was costing us," I said. "In the kitchen on Warren Street, October." "You know exactly what you said, because you're very good with words, Dalton. You always know exactly what you're saying." Something in his posture changed then, hardened. "Fine. Yes, I thought it was a bad use of your life. I still do. You want honesty? Here it is. You're 32 years old and you drive to strangers' houses to teach children to hold a bow, and I've never once complained about carrying us because I love you. But don't stand in my mother's garden and tell me I stole some great career from you. You quit because it was hard and I gave you a reason that let you feel noble about it." The cruelty of it was so precise that I actually took a step back. And the worst part, the part that made my eyes sting, was that some cowardly little corner of me had wondered the same thing at 2 in the morning more than once, and he had found it and he had used it because he knew where I kept it. "That's the meanest thing anyone has ever said to me," I said quietly. "You ask for honesty," he said. Then my phone buzzed in my jacket. His eyes went straight to it. "Who is that?" "It's nothing. It's 11:50 at night and your phone is going off. Who is it?" "Dalton. Show me." I didn't move, and I watched the certainty arrive on his face like a light coming on. "Show me the phone, Corbin." He crossed the gravel and took it out of my hand before I had decided whether to let him, and the screen was still lit, and the notification sat there in plain white letters. "Sawyer. Landed safe on my end. Hope your night was gentler than your afternoon." He read it twice. I watched him read it twice. Who is Sawyer? A man I met at the airport. You met him today. Yes. And he has your number. I gave it to him. That wasn't quite true. I'd written it on the back of his boarding pass while we were taxiing, which was worse. But the correction died in my mouth. So while I was standing in a rented tent apologizing for you, Dalton said very softly, you were giving your number to a stranger. He asked me if I was okay, I said. That's it. That's the entire crime. He asked me if I was okay, and I hadn't heard that question in so long that and my voice broke, and I hated it, and I kept going anyway, that I didn't know what to do with it, Dalton. He asked before he spoke to me. He asked permission to say a sentence, and you couldn't ask me one question in a 25-minute car ride. Are you sleeping with him? No, but you wanted to. I wanted somebody to be kind to me, I said, and I'm not going to apologize for how badly I wanted it. He stood there breathing. And then he did something I had never seen him do in 4 years. Not once, not even at his worst. He drew his arm back and threw my phone at the stone wall. It hit the corner and the screen burst, and there was that sound, that specific bright shattering, and the pieces went into the gravel, and the light of it lay face up in the dirt, still glowing, still showing half a message from a man who had asked whether my night was gentle. Somewhere up at the house a door opened. The frogs had stopped. My ears were ringing in the silence afterward. Get out, Dalton said. He wasn't shouting. That was the part that made it final. Dalton, get out. Get a hotel. Don't come to the ceremony. I'll tell them you're sick. I'll handle it. I always handle it. Behind him, up on the terrace, I could see figures at the top of the garden steps. His mother in her pale dress. His father just behind her. Both of them close enough to have heard the glass break. Meredith looked at me for maybe 2 full seconds. And then she turned around and went back inside, and his father followed her, and neither of them said one word. That was the moment. Not the phone, not the sentence about the children and the bow. It was the sight of 2 people walking calmly back into a lit house because someone had smashed something in front of them and it simply wasn't their business, and understanding that this was the family I had spent 4 years auditioning for and that they had never once considered me a person who could be harmed. I knelt down in the gravel and picked up my phone. The screen was a web of cracks and one corner was gone entirely, but it lit when I pressed it. I put it in my pocket. I didn't ask for my suitcase. I walked up the side of the garden, past the hurricane lanterns, down the long driveway between the parked cars, and out onto the dark road, and Dalton didn't follow me, and nobody came out of the house, and the party noise started up again within a minute, which I will remember for the rest of my life. I walked. There was no sidewalk, just the shoulder and the marsh grass, and now and then a car came past and lit me up and went on. My hands were shaking again and my jacket was too thin and I had no idea where I was. And I put my hand into my inside pocket and my fingers closed around a folded pharmacy receipt with a heartbeat drawn on the back of it. The screen was so badly broken that I had to type the number 3 times, my thumb finding cracks instead of digits. It rang once, then his voice, instantly awake. Sawyer Vance. And every word I'd prepared on that dark road disappeared, and what came out was a single ragged breath that wasn't a word at all. Corbin. Not a question. He knew. Okay, breathe with me. In for 4. I breathed. Are you hurt? No. Are you safe? I'm on a road, I said. There's marsh on both sides. There was a sign about a mile back for a boat landing. Good. Stay on this line and start walking toward that sign. I'm getting in the car right now. I heard a door and an engine. Talk to me about anything. Tell me about Priya. So I walked down a black road in Georgia at midnight and told a man I'd known 11 hours about a girl who plays the Elgar Concerto with her eyes closed, and my voice steadied somewhere in the second minute, and he made small sounds so I'd know he was there. Headlights came around the bend 22 minutes later, and a gray sedan pulled onto the shoulder, and he got out and left the engine running. He looked at me for 1 second and his face did something complicated. Then, in the flattest voice imaginable, did he put his hands on you? No, I said, just the phone. He nodded once, took off his jacket and put it around my shoulders. He didn't hug me. I understood later that it was deliberate. He wasn't going to touch a man who just had something taken from him without asking first. Get in the car, Corbin, he said. The heat's already on. He drove 20 minutes to a diner off the highway with 4 cars in the lot. Inside it was warm and yellow and almost empty. He put me in the corner booth facing the door. "You'll want to see the room," he said, and when the waitress came he ordered 2 hot chocolates and a plate of fries. "No coffee?" I asked. My voice came out shredded. "You've had enough things tonight that keep you awake," he said. "Tonight you get something warm and stupid and sweet." And that was when I broke. Not in the garden, not on the road, not on the phone. In a diner booth over a plate of fries, I put my face in my hands and came apart, and 4 years came out of me in a way that was not dignified. I cried about the phone and the orchestra and about his mother turning around and walking back into the light. Sawyer did not shush me or tell me it was okay. He pushed the napkin dispenser closer and let it happen, and every time I looked up he was still looking at me. When it finally stopped, I felt hollowed out and strangely clean. "My suitcase is at their house," I said. "My cello is in a storage unit that's in his name. I don't even know how much of my life is attached to him." "Then we make a list," Sawyer said. "Not tonight. Tomorrow on paper, because things are always smaller on paper than at 1 in the morning. Tonight there's one problem and it's where you sleep, and that one's solved. There's a motel 2 exits up. I've got a room with 2 beds and I'll take the one by the door." "You don't know me," I said. "I've known you for 11 hours and you drove into a marsh for me." "You want the real reason?" he said. "It isn't noble. When I sat in that parking garage 2 years ago, the worst part wasn't the ending. It was that it took me 4 years to notice, and I only noticed because a stranger in a break room asked me a question nobody else had. So somebody already did this for me. I'm not being kind to you, Corbin. I'm passing something along and it isn't mine to keep." I turned my ruined phone over on the table. The heartbeat receipt was still in my jacket, and I thought about how he'd known. "Paper you have to decide about," and I said, "You knew he'd do it." "I didn't know," he said. "But I've been a nurse for 9 years and I've watched a lot of people explain a lot of broken things, and the pattern isn't subtle." He hesitated. "I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to be the reason you leave, because if I am, then in 6 months you'll only have traded who you're doing it for." "Then what are you?" I asked. "I'm a guy with a car and a spare bed," he said, "who'd like to still be around in a year when you don't need either of them." Something loosened in my chest that had been clenched so long I'd stopped noticing it was a muscle. I looked at him across the table, at the scar on his knuckles, at the tiredness under his eyes, and I understood finally what I had been getting wrong. Love doesn't ration itself. It doesn't keep a ledger of what it's carrying and read the balance back to you in a garden. It doesn't need you smaller to feel large. It doesn't call your life's work a music thing, and it doesn't throw the one object in your hand at a wall to end a conversation it's losing. Love asks first. It asks, "Can I say something?" And it asks, "Are you hurt?" And it asks, "Are you safe?" And it asks all of that before it asks for anything at all. "I want my cello back," I said. It came out of nowhere, and it came out steady. Sawyer's eyebrows went up, and then a slow, real smile spread across his face. "Okay," he said, "that's a good first item. That goes at the top of the list. And I want to play in front of people again. Even if I'm bad now, especially if I'm bad now." "Second item," he said, "this is a very good list, Corbin." I sat with my hands around a warm mug at 1 in the morning, 17 hours after a man had taken me apart in front of 100 strangers at gate B47, and I noticed that I was not bracing. My shoulders were down, my jaw was loose. I was not composing an apology in my head for the first time in a very long time. "Can I ask you something?" Sawyer said. "You've asked me about 40 things today. Then one more won't hurt." He turned his mug a half circle. "When you get all of it back, the cello, the students, your own name on your own storage unit, would you want me anywhere in the picture? You don't have to answer tonight." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I reached across the table and closed the last inch that I hadn't closed on the plane, and put my hand over his. "Ask me again in a year," I said. "Ask me when I've got nothing left that's his." He turned his hand over under mine, and his fingers were warm. "That's a yes with paperwork," he said. "I can work with that." And in a diner off a Georgia highway, with a shattered phone on the table and a heartbeat drawn on a folded receipt in my pocket, I laughed, a real one, and felt my whole chest fill with air. "Still going. That's all a rhythm strip ever means."